Welcome back to Insects for Fun. I'm your host, Mitchell Logan, and I want to start today's episode with a question. What do you think the smallest insect is in the world? Now, you might be thinking fruit fly, maybe even a flea, but I'm sure whatever you're picturing right now is not thinking small enough, and probably not even close. Today, we're talking about fairyflies, and by the end of this episode, your entire understanding of how small a living organism can be, while still being a complete, functional being, is going to be dismantled. We're talking smaller than some single-celled organisms, and even smaller than a human neuron. First things first, what are fairyflies? Well, I can tell you one thing, they are not flies. I know, the name is a lie, but if you're in the US, you should be pretty used to lies at this point. If you know, you know. Anyway, these are actually wasps, specifically chalcid wasps in the family Mimeridae. If you look at one under a microscope, and a microscope is absolutely required, they look exactly like a tiny wasp, not a fly. The name fairyfly comes from their feathery, bristly, fringed wings, which look more like delicate brushes, and also from the fact that they're tiny and invisible, like storybook fairies. The family was formally established in 1833 by the Irish entomologist Alexander Henry Halliday, though he originally described the group as a tribe called Mimares, within a whole separate family. The type genus Mimar had been described 4 years earlier in 1829 by John Curtis, so the family name already kind of had a foundation waiting. Currently, there are around 1,400 to 1,600 described species across approximately 100 genera, and they're found on every continent except Antarctica. These fairies make homes in temperate, subtropical, and tropical habitats worldwide. And despite being literally everywhere, I mean seriously, they are one of the most abundant parasitoid wasps in many forest environments, these guys are almost completely ignored in biodiversity surveys. The reason? Because they're so absurdly small that any general form of insect collection is not going to be enough to get one. A recent 2025 study from the University of Montreal conducted the first large-scale DNA barcoding survey of fairyflies in temperate forests, and they confirmed 55 species, many potentially new to science, and they noted that less than 1% of the sequences taken matched anything in existing databases. That's how understudied these are. There are potentially hundreds of species nobody has named yet, living in forests that you've probably walked through, which to me adds further credence to why they're true living fairies. Most fairyfly species have body lengths between 0.5 and 1 millimeter, so you could fit several of them on the period at the end of this sentence. And here's where it gets hard to process. The smallest known flying insect in the world is a fairyfly called Kikiki huna. The name comes from Hawaiian and means tiny bit, which is doing a lot of heavy lifting as a description. Kikiki huna has a body length of 0.15 to 0.19 millimeters. To put that in perspective, a human hair is about 0.07 millimeters wide. So Kikiki huna is about the width of 2 human hairs placed side by side. It is visible, but only under magnification. And it was first discovered in Hawaii by entomologists John Huber and John Beardsley, and it was described in the year 2000. And then there's the overall record holder. The smallest known insect of any kind, winged or not, is Dicopomorpha ecmepterygis, described from Illinois in 1997. The males of this species of fairyfly have a body length of just 0.139 millimeters. That's approximately the width of a single human hair. And it's smaller than some species of Paramecium, which are single-celled organisms. These are literally smaller than some bacteria and smaller than a human neuron. They are essentially at the absolute lower boundary of how small a multicellular organism can physically be while still functioning. So you might be wondering how they get around in the air if they're so small. Standard insect wings are essentially flat sheets, membranes stretched across a network of veins that generate lift by moving through air. But at the scale fairyflies operate, air doesn't behave like air. The physics changes completely because the ratio of viscosity to inertia is so low that air at this scale acts more like honey. It's thick, it's sticky, and it clings. So fairyfly wings are not flat sheets. They're rows of long bristles arranged like a comb or a feather on a very thin central stalk. To us, these look like impossibly fragile decorative structures. But at their scale, those bristle combs work better than flat wings. Each bristle drags along a layer of air of comparable size, meaning the bristle effectively acts like a tiny paddle. The wings do not cut, they row, so these guys are actually swimming through the air. Here's what I find most mind-bending about fairyflies. They're complete insects. They have digestive systems, reproductive systems, circulatory systems, and a central nervous system. They even have genetic sexes with different physiologies. They have everything your regular insect has, all in a body that fits on the tip of a pin. But of course, fitting a working brain into 0.139 millimeters requires some pretty dramatic compromises. So, the smallest fairyfly species have approximately 7,400 neurons total. For comparison, a common housefly has around 100,000. A honeybee has about 1 million. And you have about 86 billion. So yeah, 7,400 neurons is not a lot to work with. And every single one is essential. You really can't remove any without the insect losing a critical function. But even 7,400 neurons is hard to fit into a head the width of a hair. So fairyflies have evolved one of the most extreme solutions in all of biology. Most of their neurons throw away their nuclei before the insect reaches adulthood. So, the nucleus is the control center of a cell. It contains the DNA and produces the proteins the cell needs. Ditching it saves enormous amounts of space, but it also means the adult insect cannot produce new proteins. It has to run entirely on proteins made during the larval stage. It's basically working off a fixed tank of fuel with no way to refuel. And this is also part of why adult fairyflies only live for about 1 to 2 weeks at most. Some males live only a few hours, and some, including those of Dicopomorpha ecmepterygis, have taken miniaturization so far that they have no functional mouth. No eyes either. They're pretty much born blind and unable to feed. So, now that we've kind of brought up how small these guys are and how they function, how do they reproduce? Fairyflies are egg parasitoids. They parasitize the eggs of other insects. So, females locate a host egg either through pheromones released from the plant or pheromones released from the insects, and then they lay their own eggs inside the egg of the host. And so with fairyflies, that's usually true bugs, beetles, or bark lice depending on the species. And fairyflies will deposit 1 to 5 eggs of their own inside that single egg. So this is actually unique to fairyflies because many egg parasitoids only have enough room for maybe 1 or 2 tops. But because fairyflies are so small, some species are able to actually deposit 5 eggs inside a single egg of their host. And so the entire life cycle from egg to adult happens inside the host egg. And when the adults are ready to emerge, they chew their way out and fly off. Some species also have males that develop inside the same host egg as the female. And some even mate with the female before she's actually emerged. So the male never sees the outside world, and the female is pre-mated and ready to go before she emerges from her pupa. So yeah, that means that they do have to mate with their direct relatives, but here's the thing, inbreeding isn't a major concern with wasps because generally speaking, males are haploid and females are diploid. This means that males actually emerge from infertile eggs and only contain half the genetic material, or one copy of each chromosome, as opposed to that of a female. This protects the offspring from getting duplicates of really bad alleles and thus getting bad genes expressed. But that's getting into some genuine genetic material, so we're gonna pivot away from that and enter the wacky name territory, because these names are pretty funny. So we've already met Kikikihuna, right, which is Hawaiian for tiny bit, but there's also a genus called Tinkerbella, and yeah, that name comes from the fairy in Peter Pan, and it also contains the species Tinkerbella nana. Nana is the name of the dog in Peter Pan and also a play on the Greek nanos, meaning dwarf. The species was described in 2013 by entomologists John Huber of the Canadian National Collection of Insects and John Noyes of the Natural History Museum in London, who actually found it in the tropical forests of Costa Rica. So Tinkerbella nana has a body length of around 0.25 millimeters, by the way. So again, that's really small. Other genera in the family include Elaptis, Anagris, Polynema, and Mimar. The family name Mimaridae itself comes from the Greek mimar, which some sources trace to the word small fly, though honestly, given how small they are, any name that means small was doing the bare minimum. Okay, so you might be thinking, all right, these things are really small and that's cool, but do they do anything important? And the answer is, of course, yes. Fairyflies are among the most abundant parasitoid wasps in many forest and agricultural habitats. They're just invisible to us. So as egg parasitoids, they target the eggs of insects before they hatch, killing potential pest populations at the earliest possible stage. The genus Anagris in particular has been extensively studied as a biological control agent for leafhoppers in rice and grape crops. Fairyflies are also biodiversity indicators. Their presence and diversity in a habitat reflects the overall health and the insect community, particularly hemipteran and coleopteran populations that they parasitize. The 2025 University of Montreal study found that temperate forests host far more fairyfly diversity than previously thought, and argued strongly that they're being overlooked in biodiversity surveys at exactly the time when insect declines make every data point count. And then there's the neuroscience angle. The fact that fairyflies can operate a functional nervous system with fewer than 7,400 nuclei-free neurons is very interesting to researchers studying brain miniaturization and neural efficiency. Understanding how they pull this off has implications for how we think about the minimum requirements for intelligent behavior, and potentially for designing more efficient computer hardware. The smallest insects in the world are inspiring computer scientists, which is the kind of sentence this podcast was made for. And with that, I think we should wrap up this episode. Thank you again for listening. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please make sure to leave a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen to. It makes a massive difference. Bonus episodes, as well as vlogs and ad-free episodes, can be found over at patreon.com/insectsforfun. And of course, you can shoot me a message on IG at insects4fun or an email to insectsfordummies@gmail.com if you've got something you want covered. Until then, stay curious. Bye.